So to give you an idea of how well prepared we are, Kenny told me, sorry, Feldsott, are you Feldsott officially? Okay, this guy told me as we walked in that he was walking the wolves the other night, he has pet wolves, when he thought of the name of our talk. So I just found out about the name of our talk as we walked in, and it is...
Is there a place for wild things in a civilized society?
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good night. So I guess that implies that maybe we're the wild things in your civilized society here. I hope we can live up to that. I'll kind of give you a little cliff notes of what we're going to do here. Well, first of all, I'm not totally sure, but we have had a few extensive conversations, and this guy has an unbelievable road from very far away to bring him to this point. And I figure I'll give him a few prompts and try to draw the story out. If anybody gets bored or has a question, we're both pretty informal. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions, point us in new directions. I also took one look at him and realized that all of my preparation was nonsense. So, we're all swimming together in this thing. So help me out if you think of something. To start you off.
Yeah.
A thing that's stuck in my head as I don't know, something I just never heard before, is you told me about I don't know if it was a childhood hobby, but early in life, before any of this took off, that you would sit at the art museum and stare at paintings and reverse engineer them all the way back to the first stroke. So that by the time you had any kind of formal interaction with painting, you already had in your head how all of these sort of masterpieces came to be. I don't know if does that get covered in creative thinking or color? I had never heard of such a thing. I didn't even know that was possible.
Well, part of that was from the fact that when I went to the Art Institute, I was younger than any of the other students, so I had no social interactions, and they all thought I was this odd kid, and I was, and so they kind of left me alone. So I would, during the breaks, I would go up into the museum and I would have my lunch. And back then, a museum was actually a quiet sanctuary. People talked in low voices, and there were a few people there. And I would pick a painting to eat my lunch at. And I would sit on a bench in front of the painting for my whole lunch. And I had this game. And the game is like to go backwards in time and figure out how the person got to where they got to in the painting. And I would take each layer of the painting and then I would go behind it and try to figure out what could have been the architecture that generated the image that I was seeing. And so I would disassemble the whole thing and just take it back to the person putting gesso on the canvas. And then the next day I would switch paintings and I'd go to another one and I'd just randomly pick them. So
Has anybody heard of such a thing before? Has anybody done this before? What's that?
I'm sorry. I was going to say it's something that I suggest to my students is, when you're looking at a painting, you're supposed to again, imagine what it would be like to craft that thing.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say?
In the book called Highly Productive People, there's ultra learning. Basically, you have to know the artist's history and how they do the work and try to integrate your work.
Got it. So you were onto something.
yeah, so for me that was a pretty organic, intuitive process. And then years later, when they were deciding whether to allow me into graduate school with no degrees or academic support, they decided to make this test. so the professors of the art history program at CCAC got together, and then they had me, and then they would show me these slides, and they wanted to hear me talk about these different paintings to demonstrate that I had some faculty for art history. And because I had done this at the Art Institute in Chicago, I was able to talk with them fluently and just blow their minds. Like, they just had no idea, like, how could this kid know this? Like, he's never had a class. And that was how I did it. So yeah.
Because you went straight to grad school? There was no...
I had gone to, I thought I was going to CCAC as an undergraduate student. And, so first year art students back then, you had like drawing, painting. I mean, you took all these basic classes. It was very, very structured. Back then, I don't know how art school is now, but back then you had to learn to draw from a figure, and you had to be able to do these very basic tasks that they considered fundamental. And so I'm in these classes, and I'm doing the thing, and I thought I'd be doing the thing, and the professors keep coming over and looking at my work, and they say, "You're not doing anything what we're telling you to do, and something's the matter with you." Like, so they finally, a couple of them said, "Well, you're unteachable. Like, you don't seem to be getting it. Like, we're giving the lessons, and you're not." Yeah, and so finally I had one art professor who was just an amazing guy, became a mentor to me over many years, and he said, "You don't belong here. This is, we have nothing. You're already doing whatever it is you do, and you're just doing it." And he says, "I got an idea." He says, how about we just put you in graduate school?" And I was like 18 years old, and I was like, "Okay, but what does that mean?" They said, "Well, we're gonna pay for your studio, and we're gonna buy you art materials, and you're gonna have to student teach one class a week, and we'll give you some money for that." And I was like, "Cool, let's do it." And that was my academic art career.
And were you better received in graduate school? Or were you still a weirdo
Yes and
alone?
no. Well, my work back in the early 70s was, for what people were doing there, you have to imagine, I mean, this was kind of at the emergence of pop art and the whole cultural phenomena of pop art. And so art was funny, and it was witty, and it was kind of jokey, and made people smile. And then this kid comes along, and I'm making this really edgy, gritty work that looks like it's scratched on the side of a bathroom stall. And people are, I'm not sure, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. And so it was disturbing. And so there I am in graduate school, and I'm already making that work, right? I mean, it's already part of my signature. And so the other students in the graduate program, they're not quite sure what to do with me. And plus they, back then, I mean, students in that program probably were in their mid to late 20s, early 30s. And then they're like, and at that age, the differential between a teenage kid and them seemed enormous.
Yeah.
So it was still a strange academic experience, but I had a good crew of people that just mostly stayed out of the way. Mm-hmm. And that was what I needed back then, to just do my work.
So, I mean, I guess in a bigger way, I'm curious about how you go from this sort of child prodigy with a formal art education, to what is considered sort of self-taught outsider artist, mm-hmm. Which is a much longer story than this moment. But I am, does that contribute? Does your sort of like outsider place even within the formality of school? Do you think that's part of?
I think
how
so.
you-
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think for a lot of us, it's kind of like you're inside outside. You know, it's like you'd like to be inside, but can't seem to find the entrance. And and back then, I wasn't so aware of like what was it that made me odd or different or strange. Like it was a little bit lost on me. And that was, whether that was in the academic world of graduate school or whether that was going into the galleries or whatever. And so it was like, I didn't identify as an outsider, but certainly back then people were, you know, this work, where does it come from? You know, it seems like your work comes from outer space or something, like, you know, like it's unprecedented in some way. And so already it was starting to kind of define itself as like, you know, you go stand over there. Like we don't quite know what to do with you.
Yeah.
And so that already energetically was kind of happening.
How are we doing on volume? Can everybody hear? Okay. Okay. So I guess I've lost my train of thought because I've asked you about volume. You got a question?
Do you feel that you needed school in order to be an artist?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
She wants to know if you felt like you needed school to be an artist, which reminds me of my question. Thank you.
No, not at all. I self-identified as an artist from when I was a small child. Like that's how I thought of myself. So no, I didn't. I was curious what I could learn there. I was curious about what other artists knew or what they did, but yeah, I didn't think of it as necessary. No.
Which brings me back to my thought,
Yeah.
which is how much of, I mean, like, if that kid could come and sit in the back of this classroom and see you, I mean, did you have some kind of concrete vision and ambition of where you wanted to go, or were you just like a kid thinking, okay, this is an interesting place to be, seems like the people are cool? I mean, what was your level of ambition and vision at that point?
Probably less than zero.
Yeah.
You know, there's a funny thing. I mean, my history as an artist is that probably I've destroyed more of my work than remains. And, you know, people, when they go into the archives, are like, oh, there's so much work here. And, you know, it's like, oh, you wouldn't even believe the amount that just got thrown out or destroyed or burnt up or left or abandoned or whatever. And so it's a funny thing, like, how do you define yourself as an artist? It's like, how do you define yourself, you know? It's how do you come to that? And for me, art had nothing to do, especially when I was younger, with ambition or any of the things that would be kind of normally grouped together with a career like that. It was just this absolute need, internal need to produce this work. Mm-hmm. And once the work was produced, I didn't give a shit about it at all. And somebody could take it, tear it up, I could tear it up, I could leave it, I could forget about it. It had no meaning to me. And people would often say, you know, like, where's that piece or that piece? Or I don't know. And then I think I tore it up. Or I think I, you know, regurgitated it I painted over it because I needed a piece of paper to paint something else. And all I knew was this drive that was inside of me that needed to physicalize itself in a certain way. And that's all that was relevant to me, certainly when I was younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. is that,
Doesn't make for much of a career, does it?
well, it's interesting to think about. I mean, I hadn't thought about thinking of myself, but I mean, the way you talk about your poor reception, like, oh, he's an outsider, his work's from outer space, like, this is unprecedented, where did it come from? From here, that sounds like the greatest praise you could ever want. But, I mean, I guess I have, not that anybody's calling me unprecedented, I'm quite precedented, but I do find that, I don't know, when you feel sort of alienated from the context, the institution, I imagine there are exceptions to this, but my experience is you don't feel like you're breaking ground or like you're an innovator. You feel like you're an outsider weirdo. And I totally relate to that impulse to smash the old work. I'm with you on that. That it's the process that really sustains it. It's not piling up a bunch of masterpieces and looking back on them. But what a funny phenomenon to talk about when you've got a show downstairs of a bunch of old work. Have you guys seen the show? You guys should see the show. It's very nearby. It's in the campus center? Is that where it was? Yeah. It looks great. And I don't know if you did any online research, but I was just saying, I looked at the exhibition book, which is beautiful and exhaustive and really nice, but the work really doesn't come across any other way as it does in person. So if you got time to kill, it's nice to stop through and find out what he didn't destroy.
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing too, because it also, as I got older, then I would notice that the work had some kind of resonance and impact on people, and there was something that was happening that was quite powerful. And I think as I got older, I began to think, I have to be more responsible about this. Like, this isn't just throwing a bunch of shit all over the place and just leaving it, and then, because years ago, I used to work on certain pieces, and then I'd go out to the ocean in the middle of the night and leave the pieces in the ocean. And
maybe a little too dramatic to claim that you didn't care. I mean, that's
I leave these pieces out on the beach, right? And one day, I was living behind Jim Carroll. He lived in the front of where I was, and he comes knocking on my door, and he says, "Hey, you gotta check this out." I said, "What?" He said, "Just come here, just check it out." I go into his living room, and there's a bunch of people sitting in the living room, and there's one of these wet, dripping sculptures that I had made, like sitting in the middle of the living room floor. And he goes, "Okay, so you know about art. What century is that from?" And he thought that he had like found some kind of rare relic, and it was going to make him rich or something, And I said, "Jim, I don't know how to tell you this, but I made that a few days ago and left it on the beach." And so, it started like, wow, I have to get my shit together as an artist who's working, and I'm making stuff, and it's moving people around. And there's something about that needs to be attended to. And that was a shift for me from kind of just, this is all about me and my process and whatever, and all of a sudden I realized that, no, there's something else going on here. And I couldn't have articulated it back then to you, and maybe I couldn't even articulate it to you now, but there was a shift in my understanding of what I was doing and who I was and all of that needed some serious attention.
But do you find that, do you recognize a through line from there to here? Like, is your creative impulse connected to that, the guy leaving sculptures on the beach?
Yeah, it's still, still the kind of the paramount experience is when I open that valve and that energy comes through and it's working and it's painting and the thing's unfolding, and I still don't really know what the fuck I'm doing, and don't know where the thing is headed. And it feels like it's going to run off the road in any moment, and it's chaotic, and but I'm all in. And that feeling in that moment is the whole thing for me. I mean, I'm not thinking about shows or careers or anything. I'm just in that moment, and that's still what it is for me.
And is that the mind shift of the young man who starts to take accountability for all the work he's doing and not start smashing it? Is it, I'm all in?
Yeah, and I think that also as I've gotten older, I think all in means also being responsible.
Yeah.
If you say something, you utter something, you make something, you expose something, whatever, all of a sudden, there's consequences that are unfolding out of that moment, and you have to be present and accountable for it, good or bad.
When you were younger, like in the earlier stages, when you were doing the process of your work, did you ever have the thought of like what other people would see, or was it just like solely just kind of like coming out? I guess like I'm thinking like, did you think about the final image of how other people would perceive it, or was it just solely for you?
No. I'm always a little bit shocked how my work is perceived, because there's the experience of making it and being in the moment of it and being engaged with the process of creativity and all the choices and decisions and lefts and rights that come there in that moment, and at some point the piece itself feels finished and the energy has expired itself. It's not really an aesthetic decision so much as it's an energetic decision. It's like the piece feels adequately vibrating, and then I'm done. It's like the piece has become animated, and then I'm not sure how people perceive it. And sometimes I'm quite surprised by people's reaction to my work and what they see in it, and the strength of their reactivity to it. And other times their perception of it is more congruent with my own. But I've never really, that's not really an active constraint in my work while I'm making it, is, I wonder what people will think of this. It's like, we'll see, And as I've gotten older, I think my work has, from the early 70s, I think that people's reaction to it is different. The society changes, and different things have happened, and so my work, I think, is perceived differently now than it was 50 years ago. So there's that too. It's like that's an ever-changing thing.
Well, it's hard to look like you've come from outer space for 50 years.
Yeah.
Been here a while.
Yeah.
Do you think that you would have made it to that all-in point where you could begin to take responsibility and think about art as the product of your whole life, if not for the kind of excitement of the world early on? Like, if you hadn't got a bit of institutional encouragement, like, did that have some role in the audacity to go all the way?
Not for me, it didn't, because actually when I was young and I got all the attention, I didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. It was I don't know, psychologically overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I'm so introverted and so awkward around people that it was super uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And so what came with that was a lot of people up in my business.
Yeah.
And that's a bad medicine for me. And so all these people all of a sudden get up in my business and they're all got opinions about, like, go this way, do this, do that, whatever. And as a kid, I'm like, my reaction to that is just self-righteous and angry, right? I don't have much nuance, psychological bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like a one-trick pony, and these people get like too into me, and then I'm like, no, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of it being encouragement or something like, oh boy, I think I'm onto something here, I'm like, I gotta get the fuck out of here, you know.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, you got it. It seems to me that whether it's acknowledged or not, I mean, I relate to that experience too, but I feel like in some way, you know, first of all, it's a privilege to push that away, to have it to push. And I
Yeah.
think that ends up being indirectly, in my experience, kind of formative. And whether it be both of us sitting here saying like, well, I'm pretty good at smashing my career. I'm pretty good, you know, like I love to work. I will work until I'm dead, but like my career, you know, it feels like that ends up being an impact of acceptance. It's like, no, I don't want that. Because I feel like, I mean, especially in an art school context, when nobody's paying attention to you, you know, that feels like it's proof of value. That's the goal. It's like, let me get my audience, let me get attention. And I don't know, I just wonder to what extent that's a dividing line for different kinds of artists. Like, you know, when you reach that first kind of watershed hallmark of, oh, I'm doing something right, the world says I should keep going, you know, it's either thank you, world, what do you want me to do next? Or fuck you, world, you know, I got to get away from you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think it's, you know, I think you probably experienced this too. There's kind of like an ambivalence, right? It's like you don't know which side of the thing you want to be on. And
Yeah, you want to be from outer space.
yeah, and so for me, it was, you know, it was complex and confusing and whatever, but absolutely, you know, there's no question that, you know, being recognized and being shown in museums, you know, I'm still like a teenager, whatever, you know, it's like, it's definitely like, I'm up to something, and the audience might be small, but there's people out there that get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that absolutely kind of filters into some kind of empowerment. And so even though I'm, you know, I take some kind of long hiatus from the art world and I'm in seclusion and I'm working in my studio, I know that there's people out there, I don't know who they are, but I know there's people out there that would acknowledge or recognize the work. And so it's definitely something that's working in there.
Yeah.
No
well,
question.
And that's
Yeah.
interesting because I think that, in a way, is the intact original impulse of looking for the audience, of the sort of message in a bottle nature of trying to translate your internal experience into an external object. It's like, even if those people don't exist, like here's my little SOS for those people. Like, see me over here. And, you know, it's interesting that superficial success on some level is like, and I keep hearing this expression lately, but it's like the dog catching the car. Like, oh, you get the car now. Well, what am I going to do with this car? I don't want this thing. I want to chase.
Well, but now as I've gotten older, that kind of the SOS and the message in the bottle has turned into a much more conscious thoughtful seeing in terms of how that works into my work, into my process, into my understanding of what I'm doing here. And partly what I'm doing here is functioning as an educator, a teacher. And so it's not so much look at me anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we all got to look at ourselves here, and we got some work to do.
Yeah.
And it's important. And whether I'm here or not, it's important.
Right. Well, and is there any notion of, like the paper airplane into the world that you're not in, like the world after you? Leave proof?
Well, I don't know about leaving proof, but absolutely I feel like as long as I've got some time left, that I better make use of it. And the world that I'm kind of imagining or envisioning, I don't think I'm going to be here for that world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping to inspire some people and leave some markers and some breadcrumbs so that people can build that kind of world and live in that kind of world. My children, my grandchildren, whatever. I'm absolutely concerned about a multi-generational process here,
Mm-hmm.
of which I don't think I'm going to see much more of it myself. And that doesn't really matter, but it has lent a certain kind of take no prisoner approach to my work and my attitude now.
Mm-hmm. I'm generally, personally, very curious about the creative impact, the impact on your vision, your will to continue of isolating yourself, of going away. But you're going away, there's so many good stories. I feel like it'd be a shame to skip to that. Will you tell us a little bit about your endless saga of going away? Like, what was your first step away?
Well, I've had many going aways, but I was between jobs at one point, and I was offloading some firewood off the back of a friend's pickup truck years ago, and we're just chucking wood, and he says to me, "Hey, you got to come with me and help save the rainforest." This is like in the mid '80s. I said, "Where? What?" He said, "The rainforest, it needs saving. You got to come with me." I said, I don't know anything about that." He said, "Yeah, you'll be fine. You'll be great. We got to go save the rainforest." I was like, "Where the fuck is that?" And he's like, "Well, it's down south. We'll go there and you'll help me save it." I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about and why and all that stuff." And he says, "Don't worry, you'll be great." And I don't
Still
know, a
friends?
day. What?
Are you still friends?
He passed some years ago.
Okay, sorry.
And I come into the house that day or the next day or whatever, and told Dee, my partner and wife, I said, "Well, I got to go. I got to go down to the rainforest. Help this guy save the rainforest." She said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, we're going to go save the rainforest." I was like, "Well, it sounds crazy. Like, what do you know about that?" I said, "Nothing. I don't know." He said, "I'll be great. It'll be fun." So we left. And we're down there and driving around an old Volkswagen, and turns out he doesn't know where the rainforest is. And so we get down there, and we're like asking people, "Do you know where the rainforest is?" And people are like, "What the fuck? Like two crazy gringos, what do you..." And so we're just like driving around these small towns, and we're like asking these really weird questions. And well, the whole thing's a complete farce, and it's like some kind of just bizarre mission we're on. But we're so weird, and we're asking such odd questions that we catch the attention of a social anthropologist from the University of Mexico who's working in one of these communities. And she's like, what are these people doing here? Like, we're doing serious work down here. And they're just like knocking on people's doors and where's the rainforest and all this stuff. And so she calls me at this little room we're staying in, and she's mad. She's like, what are you guys doing down here? And what's your intention? Like, she just can't even grok what we're there for. And I'm like, we're here to save the rainforest. She goes, oh my God. But now she thinks I'm like totally deranged. And she's like, wants to just get us out of town. So she goes, well, you need to meet with me. And we met. Her name was Luisa Pare. She was a brilliant social anthropologist out of the University of Mexico and doing extraordinary, revolutionary work with community projects and the environment and social welfare. At that time, it was unprecedented, the work that she was doing. And God knows, one of these moments, she decides to make me her assistant, this crazy guy. And she and I kind of hook up, and she winds up teaching me about community development and all this stuff, which is what leads me into working with all these communities and radically changes my life. And it all starts from this kind of like completely ridiculous Don Quixote mission into God knows where, you know, that is part of, you know, how my personality functions, you know, so. It's like,
Yeah, it seems like most of the sort of defining turning points in your life all started with, okay, I'll try.
well, we were talking about that at the house, you know, it's kind of like this, sometimes, you know, young people come to me and they're talking to me about their careers and whatever, and I'm like, you know, I said, you know what, I don't know if I'm a good example or not, but I never had a plan. I never had a plan. It's like every major thing that happened to me in my life, it happened because I just found myself standing somewhere. Somewhere the journey had brought me to that place, and then someone was there, something was there, something happened that, you know, looking back over many, many years, it's like, oh, that was a pivotal moment in my life, and it was like completely unexpected and unforeseen, and then the next thing I know, my entire life is changed. And that's happened to me many, many times over the course of my journey. Blessed with a lot of amazing people that happened to be those people who were directing traffic, you know.
Right.
So.
I wish we had time for the martial arts story. I was retelling it last night. It's a very good story. Just use your imagination. Forgive me for being inspired in all different directions as you talk, but it occurs to me as we're talking about the longevity of the project, of the impulse. I've noticed, or it's very obvious in the story, all the stories of uncompromising artists who push themselves and push themselves and push themselves, make themselves available to the world. And I think also, I think about it in the lives of people who are kind of, you know, bound to these arcane, spiritual, you know, whether it be yogis or your spiritual healing or, you know, whatever it may be, that there's something about the necessity of being very available to the world, kind of being, you know, property of your whims. That, like, I don't know, it seems like there is a lonely destiny for, you know, built into that. And people work around it. I mean, you have a wonderful family. And I'm just curious, I mean, how do you reconcile that? Like being so available for the world, being so tied to your work, and then also, like functioning as a partner and a father, and like, what's the evolution of that? Like, was that a hard one to figure out?
Well, definitely had its moments. It's been hard, but it's also been a privilege. The thing I come back to is that my family, my relationship, my extended family is not some kind of burden or like something else, like that's somehow in the way. It's actually the thing itself, right? It's a expression of service, of love, of whatever. And as everybody knows, I mean, it's easy to say these words. It's hard to walk that path. And I've done a kind of a screwed up job at it, by and large. I've walked a crooked path and wish I had done better, or wish I had turned left when I turned right, and all that kind of stuff. But always in the spirit of trying to hold those things with equanimity. And I always think of it like it's like whittling. It's like sitting on the porch and you're just whittling and you're carving something, and the next day you whittle again, right? And so you're never quite done. I've never kind of come up with the magical formula or alchemy that tells me kind of how everything should be or the order everything should be in. And my nature is impulsive. It's a nature that responds to invisible voices, and so that has been both a curse and blessing for my family too, right? I'd like to live with somebody who hears voices and then gets up and follows them, and doesn't seem to realize, well, actually nobody's in the room. It's like, so no, but you heard it too, right? Like, so I hope, in the end, I hope that I act as an inspiration for my kids and grandkids and my family, and it's been a rough road for them as well, right? Because it's like to have a father that is, so called is difficult, yeah?
What made me think of it was you describing taking responsibility as a turning point in your artwork. And I wonder, is that, we can't put one word on the education of a life of following your nose and figuring it out, but is taking responsibility, is that like a recurring kind of educational experience? Is that formative for you?
Totally. And and I've talked about this too. It's like if you're going to live a life where you show up and you wander the path that's laid out there for you from spirit, then you've got to be accountable. And sometimes that's been easy and sometimes not, but that's definitely my inspiration, is to be held accountable.
Okay. Let me jump off in a different direction on hearing voices, because we had a conversation recently about voices. And I thought about it again, looking at the work, looking at the catalog. I guess for context, we got to kind of blow our cover here. So we spent time together recently. I was a recipient of Kenny's psychedelic therapy. And my kind of crucial to that experience, or most interesting coming out of it, was that in the moment of that kind of, experience with the psychedelic medicine, I found that proper communication, that language was really kind of invasive and repugnant to me, and that I was much more interested in the invisible voices, as you call them. And I came back to my work after that experience, and happen to be in a process now where I'm going through years and years and years of work. And I find with that new insight that a lot of what I thought of as being sort of really mine, so much of it is borrowed from common language, and I've become so much more interested in places where I've made mistakes, and there are these unintended, kind of non-linear, non-language-based moments. And you know, we haven't gone into great detail about it, but you wear a lot of hats. You speak a lot of languages. And it was interesting to me to see in the COVID diaries in particular, but throughout, I mean, words are a big part of your work. And so, I mean, I don't know if this is just like a big morass to send you in to wade through, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you reconcile the languages, and how do you land on a voice when you have so many of them?
That's a good question. I don't know, you know, I think like I've been in a lot of places where the normal conversational language was not something that the two people participating understood of each other, right? And so I've been in indigenous communities where Spanish, for example, was a second or third language. And speaking certain indigenous dialects of which I knew not even the first 5 verbs of. And so then I'm in these situations where I'm culturally transplanted and vulnerable and can't even understand the most basic language communications. So then how does one navigate? And fortunately, what served me in those situations was that there was some kind of deeper voice. There's some kind of deeper communication that's happening, and it's happening underneath what is normally used to communicate, what we use as language. And so for me, that's a kind of a familiar place to tap into. And so like what you're talking about, that concept of accidents or mistakes, you know, I come from a cultural worldview where I believe there are no accidents. Everything is meant to be. Spirit is leaving breadcrumbs, and just because spirit leaves a breadcrumb that's not in your original consciousness doesn't mean it's an accident or a mistake. In fact, for me, that becomes something to become incredibly curious about. And so over the years in my art and certainly in being amongst people of which normal conversation, certainly in the beginning, was not possible, I've learned to turn off that kind of language center as the primary mode of communication and instead rely on other kinds of sensory apparatus that are known to us, but also the sensory apparatus of which is less developed in our culture, which you find amongst indigenous people to be more developed. I'm talking about almost a radar or a receptor site that's receiving and transmitting energy that is beyond language. And amongst traditional people who are living more traditional lifestyles, you find those apparatus more developed. And in our culture, you find it less developed, and you find people more dependent on kind of more conventional streams of communication. And how do I express myself and all of that. And so I'm fortunate that I've had both, and I've had both modeled to me. And so you talk about, you know, you mentioned living with wolves, living with wild animals that are not domesticated and not genetically inclined to be domesticated. And there, one of the fascinating things of living with such creatures is you have to be able to rely on some kind of communication technology that's not language-based, that's not word-based. And so I see both as having kind of meaning and importance. and being able to shuttle back and forth as necessary between that kind of apparatus is, to me, critical. And so there's words in my paintings, and they're intentional, and they're sometimes left to read, and sometimes it's just left that, oh, he wrote something here, but no, you can't read it. Mm-hmm. Because I want you to turn that apparatus on and off, to develop some kind of fluidity in that mechanism, so that you can see that actually we're all born with this capacity. But if you don't use it, it's like a muscle you don't use. It atrophies. But if you use that muscle, you start to find, oh, I have language and I have all these communication skills, and I have this apparatus, this energetic architecture in me that is also able to receive and send messages. And it works just fine.
Right.
So,
Got it. So in a way, those titles and text end up functioning as your own version of the spiritual breadcrumb.
yeah.
Okay.
It's like in a lot of my paintings, you'll see untitled painting with.
Right.
And the mind all of a sudden just does this, like, what? Isn't that the title? And it's like, no, it's like I'm trying to communicate and help you to turn that apparatus on and off.
And is there a meaningful connection, or has it just become an impulse that you are also, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I don't think I'm making up that you feel kind of like a secular kind of messenger for this obscure Amazonian way of thinking. Are you generally delivering messages from the spirit world? Is that your MO? So it seems like it kind of.
I don't know if I'd use the word messenger. I'd say the pizza delivery boy would be better use the word. Yeah.
Bring you
But
pizza.
yeah, I often feel like the pizza delivery boy. Like, you ordered this pizza, here it is.
Yeah.
And I didn't remember ordering the pizza. No, you ordered it. Here it is. Right?
Yeah. You'll get used to the toppings.
Yeah.
I realize that we're a bit off in the weeds in our own interest in each other. Are there any questions or thoughts? I don't want to ignore you guys. No pressure. You don't have to. Also, how are we doing on time? I just want to check in on.
We are good. We have about 10 more minutes.
10 minutes? Oh, we're killing it. What do you got back there?
So, what was your greatest inspiration to strive for art as a career?
What did he say?
He said, what was your greatest inspiration to strive for art as a career?
Well, kind of as I said earlier, it wasn't. I didn't imagine art as a career. I knew I was an artist, and I made art, and I seemed to. That seemed to be organically just true for me. Maybe I should have thought more about art as a career, because maybe I would have been in a different situation. But I didn't really understand it as a career until I was much older. So by then I realized that it's a complicated world in and of itself that has its own things. So still learning about it.
Cool. This question is really out there. You talk to a shaman, or you are a shaman?
Well, I don't like to use that word defining myself. We use that word, it's actually a Siberian word. But it's been in the common language of English now. That word has been used to describe a whole range of people worldwide. And I consider myself a practitioner and a student of shamanism. And so, what is shamanism, right? And most people don't even know what shamanism is. And so, just for a brief definition of terms, right, so that we all can agree. Shamanism is a old practice that arose amongst our hunter-gatherer ancestors before sedentary agriculture. And it was practiced amongst people that believed that the world in its entirety was animated. So they did not divide the world into animate and inanimate objects like Western cultural world does. So a mountain, a rock, a tree, an animal, a river, an ocean are all alive. So all of creation is imbued with consciousness. All of creation is imbued with power and a life force, a meaning. And so shamanism is a tradition and a technology that's practiced in every continent of the world, amongst every people that I have ever experienced can trace their ancestry to the practice of shamanism, where their ancestors would speak to and align themselves with the fundamental elements of the natural world. So the objects in the natural world, as well as the energetics, the weather, the wind, the rains, the sun, the moon, these kinds of things. And people who practice shamanism believe that these things are energetically, have certain kinds of power and have certain kinds of impact on their life. So you'll find that traditional people, for example, will send offerings to the mountain for its blessings on their hunt or on their practices in life. And so the practice of shamanism involves kind of basically aligning oneself with the natural world and natural forces, and believing that it's possible to cultivate within oneself a greater alliance with those natural forces, whether it be the wind or the rain or the river or the animal or the bird or something like that, right? And so that's all that when somebody says they are a practitioner of shamanism, that's all they're talking about. They're not talking about Disneyland magic or weird things. They're just talking about a way of life that is about more and more coming into a unification or harmony with the natural world and natural forces, and then drawing those natural energies into oneself. And so you see this in Taoism, and you see this in many, many practices around the world. And to the outsider who's looking at shamanism, this is where some of the misinformation comes from. The person appears to be maybe more powerful or have more capacity than an average person. And so, they must have some kind of secret power. Well, they do. They are unified with the power of the earth, and so it is kind of exponentially adds to their capacity, whether it be their endurance or their strength or their perceptions or other kinds of capacities. And so when someone says, "Are you a shaman?" I prefer to use the word a practitioner of shamanism, as long as we understand what shamanism is, right? And don't make it into some kind of bullshit kind of airy-fairy kind of thing, right? It's a very fundamental practice that everybody in this room, you have an ancestor who practiced shamanism long before the emergence of the world's religions, right? And so this is how our ancestors conducted themselves. And so all of us have a direct lineage to these practices. It's not appropriation. It is inside of our birthright. And so that's how I understand these things.
Thank you. We have another
No, you go ahead.
question.
Thank you.
When it comes to creating, have you found it necessary to set any sort of boundaries specifically in terms of yourself and more so relating to how other folks perceive your work? Have you had to set any sort of personal boundary with yourself to like either let people get to you or not and what they interpret things as? How do you relate with that?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, as a painter, it's like, I have no control over people coming to see my work and then having whatever response to it that they do. It's kind of, that's the life of a painter, right? Is I put these images out into the world and then they have a life of their own. And I'm comfortable with that. And do I have, personal boundaries and whatever? Yeah, I have quite a few. So, but that's, there's, when you make art and you put it out into the world and you let it loose in the world, you have to be kind of willing to accept that it has a life of its own and it's doing things to and with people that are both inside of my calculation and outside.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mind if I do a couple more? Yeah. Okay. You told me that your work was described, now that the shamanism cat's out of the bag, that your work was described as shamanistic long before you knew what that word even meant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of a softball, but I'm just curious, having had multiple different incarnations of my own creative stuff, is practicing shamanism, does practicing shamanism make you a better artist, or has being an artist made you better at practicing shamanism? Which one's the chicken?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that at all. I just, what you're referring to is like back in the early 70s, a curator from the Museum of Modern Art saw my work, and he was working on this curatorial theory of the influence of shamanic energetics in an emerging stream of contemporary art. Mm-hmm. And he picks me as one of the examples of that. And I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And looking back, I understand that I am kind of organically and intuitively messing around with that stuff, but not in any kind of conscious or thoughtful or trained or disciplined way. But I have some kind of intuitive connection to those energetics. And so that's always been part of my work. And whether or not it's made me a better artist or vice versa, that part I don't know, because I don't know how to measure that. I'm just trying to be the best person I can be, period.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be the best version of myself and oftentimes just falling a bit short.
Right.
So then there's like, okay, got work to do.
That's funny. I've been wanting to ask you about your relationship with your ego. You beat me to it. I didn't realize that we were so low on time, but before we totally blow our opportunity here, forgive me for this one too, but like, what are the howls that wake us in the night? Which is the name of his show at the, what's it called? The Campus Center? The Emily A. Wallace Gallery.
So Heewon, when she approached me to do the show, she had a vision. She had a curatorial vision. And so she starts picking all these pieces from many, many years of work. And as I was just telling you, she's the only curator that I've met thus far who had the courage to go through my archives and pick a very, very particular body of work. Mm-hmm. And the work had to do with injustice and genocide and war and violence and people's, just absolute, stupid and ignorant behavior of one kind and another. And so as soon as she told me that, I was like, okay, let's do this. And so here's, I mean, it certainly people who only see this show and only know this about my work are going to think it's awfully, I'm obsessed with just darkness or something. But I really wanted to do the show, and then she said, well, what's the title? I said, title? I don't have a title to it. You pick the work. You find the title, And, so we kind of batted around some different things, and as you know from being at the house, one of the things that we ask people in the morning when they wake up is when we're sitting around the breakfast tables, we said, did the howling wake you up last night? Because we live with wolves, and they sometimes howl in the middle of the night. And people have different reactions to this animal kind of shrieking in the middle of the night. And it's just a funny kind of inside joke at our family breakfast table.
Right.
Not that anybody could do anything about the howling, but, did it wake you up? And then I thought, oh, that's the show.
Right.
That's the show. These are the parts of ourselves that wake us in the middle of the night. And these are the stories and the events that wake us in the middle of the night. And this is why we don't sleep well, and why we're anxious, and why we're stressed out. And someone says, well, why are you stressed out? And you can't really think of you don't have a good answer. And then you just realize, well, these are the times in the world that we're living in. And it's fucking intense to be in this moment in history right now. And it's hard. And so even if your own life is pretty good and your own thing is pretty stable and all this kind of stuff, you can't not hear the howling in the middle of the night. It's just not possible anymore. And that wakes you. And waking you has kind of, well, you get woken in the middle of the night and you're irritated, disturbed. But, the Buddha said, what was the purpose of his work? It was just to wake up from the dream. And maybe, that's for all of us now, living in this moment, is just to wake up from this fucking dream and see what's really going on here and roll up our sleeves and do something about it.
That's a good ass answer. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.